I'm very excited to be able to have this education panel today. As you know, last year we had a panel on flight surgeons and training of flight surgeons, which turned out to be at the right time. One of the things we've found out from the flight surgeon area is that we've kind of under-trained, and with the expansion of commercial space flight, we've had a little bit of a shortage of enough flight surgeons to cover all of the different commercial companies and all the activities at NASA, and we've been under-training a bit. And there's no doubt that if you look back from Apollo to now, the space program is a huge draw to get individuals who are young interested in the science and engineering and math and the medical areas for their education and training, looking to work in the space program because it's so exciting and it's so important for humanity. And when you get to be my age, you also realize that we've got to be able to replace people who are getting old and are at the end of their careers. And not only is the need for more people in the space program is expanding because of all the commercial flights and the coming exploration and the lunar programs and these sort of things, but also so we need more people, but we also need to replace those who are leaving the scene. And so this panel is extremely important, and I'm very excited to be able to hear it. And I also thank Dr. Dunbar, who's so involved with education now, to be the coordinator for the panel. Dr. Bonnie Dunbar is from Washington and attended the University of Washington, where she got her bachelor's and master's degree, and then she went to the University of Houston to get her doctorate in mechanical and biomedical engineering. And she became an astronaut in 1980 and flew on 5 different shuttle missions, and also was, along with Norm Zaggard, was training as a cosmonaut in Star City, and that came in handy because she did go to Mir on STS-71. In her current role, she's a professor and the John and B. Slattery Professor of Aerospace Engineering at Texas A&M University, and she's also the director of the Aerospace Human Systems Laboratory and is involved in their centrifuge laboratory as well. So, Bonnie, we'll turn this one over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Mr. Abbey, for continuing this session that we have every year now on education and STEM and inspiring the next generation. It's so important that we not just talk to ourselves, but we ensure that we're communicating to the rest of the community. And we heard some of that yesterday about this wonderful national lab that we have in low Earth orbit that many of my students don't even know is there. And they're in aerospace engineering, right? So we still have challenges ahead of us, but fortunately we have very many passionate people who are involved in this outreach in several different sectors of the community, whether it be formal education or informal education or on international levels. My co-chair in the past years has been Mr. Carl Deutsch, who was with the Canadian Space Agency. He is retiring from that as well. He's retired from several other jobs, and because I believe he's linked in today listening, I wanted to pay tribute to his effort over these many past years. I first met Carl when I was at NASA headquarters, and we were trying to get the International Space Station off the ground. When you read his bio, and I hope you do, because the Canadian Space Agency is one of our partners, he's actually occupied most of the senior positions, leadership positions in the Canadian Human Spaceflight Endeavour. He helped develop the Canada arm, the remote manipulator system that I had the opportunity to operate. He established the Canadian Astronaut program and their space station program. He was Vice President of Human Spaceflight, Vice President of Programs, and acting President of the Canadian Space Agency, as well as Chairman of Canada's National Space Plan Task Force before becoming President of the International Space University. So I want to thank him for being a co-chair all these years. And normally, I'm so glad that we're picking up face-to-face. We've had a working group session on the very last day, which we won't this time, where we all get together and we talk about what are the actions that we can take forward to the future. And many of our panelists here have actually been part of that in past years and helped to put together those action items. One of those action items over past years is the need to have a landing place, a web place where we can put all of our web addresses as a kind of traffic cop, one place shopping. And the person who had offered to do that is no longer with us. So I'd like to pay tribute to Dr. John Charles, who was at NASA, became the chief scientist, but I first met him as a young principal investigator on STS-32 while he put me in the lower body negative pressure device and collected data. And I watched him grow in his career in cardiovascular research. And when he retired, he went to Space Center Houston as sort of their science ambassador, but also for educational outreach. And on one of our very last discussions, we actually talked about how Space Center Houston might be able to put that landing platform together, and that's still going to be one of our forward actions. Stepping into Carl's place is one of our former panelists, by the way, and very well qualified to do that, is Francesco Fusco, who is a principal engineer at the Boeing Company, but for the last 15 years has been the executive director for the Foundation for International Space Education, bringing in students from all over the world and hosting them here in the local area to learn about space and space exploration. So I've asked Francisco to say a few words and welcome him as my new co-chair.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's actually a privilege to hosting this panel. As Bonnie would say, I support this panel for several years, and because like everybody probably here on the panel, I share the same passion and interest of promoting STEM studies and international collaborations, and using the subject of space to basically pick the students' interest and get them to achieve great goals. And it works really well. So needless to say, investing in education is investing in our future. So I really think that spending time and energy for that is doing a great service to society. And I'd like to thank everybody that does that. And of course, George and Abby and the Bacon Institute to keep this window on educational panel on this summit through the years. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to introduce the panelists, and then each of the panelists will have some time to talk and express their idea, and then we open up for questions at the end.
Yeah, so we'll make sure that we've got everybody present in just a moment, and that will be our format. Francesco and I'll take turns actually reading a short bio for everybody on the panel before we give them about 5 minutes to talk about their programs, successes, challenges, and if you run out of things to talk about, I'll ask you questions as we go forward. So I'm going to actually move down to this seat. And I'm going to first introduce the astronaut to my right, Dr. Linda Godwin. Linda also left NASA to go into academia. She has her bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from Southeast Missouri State University. She joined NASA in 1980 and was selected as an astronaut in 1985. We both, I think it was Mission Ops, were you in, how did you join NASA?
As a reject from the 1980 class, I got a job offer to work in mission control and payload operations. I think I moved into the office that you had just vacated.
Yeah, so we both started out in mission operations. I was the reject for the 1978 class, so it sort of works that way. She flew 4 space shuttle flights and including to Space Station Mir, and she's been Deputy Chief of the Astronaut Office, Acting Deputy Director of Flight Crew Operations, and she's served on the exploration programs in the past. So we welcome her to the panel. Next to her, and I'm actually going to let Francesco introduce our NASA rep a little bit later. I'm going to go on to Mike Lembeck, and Mike's actually down there. Did you get a name tag?
Yep.
Perfect.
All
Thank
taken
you.
care of. Thank you.
So he's a clinical associate professor in the aerospace engineering department at the University of Illinois. He left a very productive and successful career to go into academia. He provides lessons learned to his students based on 40 years of experience in commercial spaceflight, government contracting, and NASA. And he teaches a 2-semester senior capstone course that he'll talk about a little bit later. He's helping his students to learn about industry and the industry setting for spacecraft design. He's also director of the Laboratory for Advanced Space Systems at Illinois, called LASSI, providing students with opportunities to design, build, and fly experimental CubeSat satellites. And he does some of this in collaboration with the university's 4-H program. As a 9-year member of 4-H, I think it's really important to bring that out to the rural students as well. And he's co-chair of the AIAA, one of their more important committees right now on UAPs. So I'll let him talk about his education in a moment. The next person on my list is Mr. Chris Barber, and I think it's, Chris, are you with us? There he is. And you don't have to speak yet. I'm going to introduce you.
All right. I'll
Okay.
quieten down again.
Okay, so he with actually Mr. Abbey's help, founded a program, an international program called ISET in 1998 with the objective of instilling the NASA "you can do it" spirit in young people. It's provided educational events for young people that include programs at Johnson, Kennedy, Goddard, Ames, and Marshall Space Flight Center. The so-called astronaut leadership experience is based on NASA's astronaut training, and that takes the students to wild and remote areas, which he can talk about. And then he can talk about the different missions that they have, and particularly the interaction that he's had with teachers in Houston and the Johnson Space Center. There's also an online component to that. And then the next person I'll introduce, also online, is a colleague, astronaut, Mr. Fred Hayes. Fred has a long career in spaceflight, and before that was a fighter pilot in the military, 20 years with NASA as a test pilot and as an astronaut. He was the prime or backup on 4 missions during the Apollo program, with his April 1970 Apollo 13 mission to the moon the most prominent. And for that, we remember that failure is not an option. He was a commander of the Space Shuttle Enterprise on 5 test flights during the approach and landing tests, which I watched as a young engineer at Rockwell International. And I believe I even met Fred in a hallway once, but I'm sure he doesn't recall. I was in my late 20s. And after leaving NASA in 1979, he had a 17-year career in the aerospace industry with Northrop Grumman as their vice president of space programs and president of Northrop Grumman Technical Services. His major activity after he retired was a founding board member of the Infinity Science Center in Mississippi. The importance of having informal education for the public cannot be overstated. And in that capacity for the past 20 years, he's been involved with facility funding support, construction, exhibit design, and participation in children's STEM activities. And so Francesco will now introduce Mr. Alex Blackwood.
All right, so I see Alex there. So Alex was the creator and founding member of the Scottish Space School, which promote STEM education amongst pupils and teachers throughout Scotland with the support of friends and colleagues from NASA. He created in January 2000. His legacy lives on. After leaving Career Scotland, Alex was appointed Chief Executive of the International Education Business Partnership Network, the IPN, an organization that brought together partnership from around the world between education and business for the benefit of the education of young people. Later, he was the co-creator of PIN Scotland that brought together both the relationships formed with international space communities during the years of the Scottish Space School and the international relationships developed through his leadership at the IPN to create space STEM activities with NASA and beyond, with countries from Canada to South Africa, Norway to the USA. Programs that continue to this day. The main principle of all projects and programs he has developed and promoted across the world follow the same model, that there is a cascading effect in each country with pre- and post-program activity, where there is involvement from a much larger group of young people and teachers that actually participate in the activities directly. And I see Steve.
I think it's Dr. Ludmila Burakovka.
Ludmila over here. So Ludmila is the Deputy Director of the Institute of Biomedical Problems and the head of the Cell Physiology Lab. She's the principal investigator of programs and projects supported by Russian Academy of Science in field of life science, principal investigator of space experiments on board of the ISS, principal investigator of the 15 project by Russian Foundation of Basic Research and Russian Scientific Foundation, coordinator and chairman of the International Summer School, Space Biology and Medicine, expert of Russian Ministry of Science and Education, mentor of 20 PhD students, supervisor of master program Space Biomedicine at the Space Faculty of Moscow State University. She's member of the Russian Space Research Council, elected member of State Advisory Committee, Aerospace and Underwater Medicine, member of Russian Academy of Cosmonautics, Advisory Council member and Russian Ministry of Science and Education, International Union of Psychology Science, member of board of the General Assembly, editorial board member of Human Physiology and Aerospace and Ecology Medicine, Cell Technology in Biology and Medicine. She's recipient of many awards and honors, and she's author of more than 150 papers, 14 patents, and 5 books.
I don't know if Dr. Steve Robinson has joined us. Do we know if he's up? There he is.
Yep, I am here. Good
So
morning.
Francesco will introduce him.
So before joining the faculty of the University of California, Davis in 2012, Stephen Robinson spent 37 years at NASA, where he worked as an engineer, research scientist, and astronaut. Robinson is now a tenured professor in the UC Davis Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department and serves as the director of the UC Davis Center for Spaceflight Research and the UC Davis Human Robotic Vehicle Integration and Performance Lab. During his 17 years at NASA as NASA astronaut, Robinson flew on 4 space shuttle missions, including 3 spacewalks. Robinson is a UC Davis alumnus in mechanical and aeronautical engineering, double bachelor in 1978, and received a master and a PhD from Stanford University Mechanical and Aero Astro Engineering in 86 and 90.
And I believe, Dan, are you with us? Dan Barstow?
Yes, I am.
Okay, when we get to you, we'll have to have you introduce yourself now that you're with the Association of Space Explorers, okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And then I think that's going to be the same for Jakarta Varnado, who's with Education and STEM at NASA Johnson Space Center. Is that right? So when we get to you, you'll have to fill us in on some of that. And regrettably, Salajan Sharapov, who is with the is a cosmonaut with the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Russia, and actually flew with us on my last space shuttle flight, is running a very productive educational program at Star City, but was not able to connect with us today. So with that, in 5 or 6 minutes, make your case, talk about your successes and your challenges, and we're going to start with Linda.
I don't know if it's better to be first or last, in this thing, but just thinking back on my NASA career and all of the people I worked with, everybody has an interest in education, and there's a lot of informal educating that goes on because we interface with people and we talk to students. I think all of us, it's our most fun thing to do is to go talk to students. But, just the general public, we want to educate them about what NASA's doing and what's going on. And at the end of my astronaut career here at JSC, I was interested in getting back into academia. And so I was able to do that through going back to the University of Missouri at Columbia, which is where I went to grad school, and back to the department where I got my PhD. I actually think that was my in, getting to go back and do that. And it has been a whole different experience and challenging in different ways. I did that for about 8 years full-time, and now I'm into my, third or fourth year of part-time teaching, and that may extend for a little while longer. But it was great to go back and do a more intensive, student interaction and see students in classes. A large part of my teaching there was a gen ed astronomy class where, it's not exactly human spaceflight, but space in itself, whether you're talking about near research here in our solar system or farther afield, it's a hook for people in STEM, because it's something they can look up and think about, or they see it on the news. And certainly Hubble, such a success from the shuttle program with multiple missions, to go do maintenance and everything, has been a big draw for people. So astronomy ends up being a big draw for STEM as well. And I'd like to hope with the few thousand students that I had in my classes over those years who may not have all gone into STEM fields, that they became a little more aware of, what science is doing in their lives, because that's a part of our interest in our education outreach. And then I got to develop a class that was fun for me on the physics of spaceflight exploration, which at a higher level, is how do we even start thinking about moving around the solar system? And of course that devolves into a lot of specialties that people can get into, all the way from propulsion to materials for lots of things. But I feel like everybody needs to understand the overall view of where you're trying to get to so you can be a more productive member of the bigger team. And I also had the thought that after my 30-year NASA career, I learned a lot more when I went back to teach about it. As often happens. I wish I could feed some of that back into my earlier years. But that's been interesting, and I'm still doing that, and I get a lot of mechanical engineering majors in that who are working on their aerospace minor. And sometimes, I feel like they spent their first 2 or 3 years of college learning to plug things into MATLAB, and they got to change their perspective a little bit to come back and think, what are you actually doing here, and how do you know if it's right, and what's going to work, and how do you get started even thinking about the problem? And it's been fun, of course, to continue to do local outreach with students around there. And it is true that everybody is still interested in spaceflight, and they don't think sometimes enough about the breadth of jobs that you can have in that program. So that's something anytime I've gone to talk to the public up there, and I get a lot of opportunities. I really want to talk about what's going on now and what opportunities could there be for you, even if you're not exactly in this field or this field, or another field. There's so much out there. And the rise, I see that the rise of private space has really caught young people's interest. They may think more about SpaceX than NASA these days, but there's something in that broad array out there that is really bringing people on board. So there's a lot of interest in that. And one of the latest things I started on, just kind of winding down, my career, I guess, in education, I joined a project that's been ongoing by another professor there, also mostly retired, in my department, where we're interfacing with young teachers all the way from K through 12. So it's a project that's looking at STEM and how can you better integrate math and science teachers in the younger years, because we really depend on this feed that's coming from their secondary and elementary education. And there's just so many challenges out there for teachers. And one of the things that people come in, they really like the concepts of physics and they want to be in it, but they don't have the math because somehow they never got a good background in it. They didn't go to school where it was. They didn't, maybe they were taught differently. So we're trying to encourage, incremental change and thinking about integrating and having the educators talk to each other between math and science and see how it integrates. And that, I think, better tells them, why are you studying this at all? It's because there are these really interesting things out there you can get out there and do with it. So it's ongoing, and I'm sure I'll keep doing some of this for a long time, but I'm probably stepping back from teaching in the physics department maybe after this year. But the education outreach, I think, continues for all of us.
Well,
That's sort of where I am.
and Linda brought up a good point, and so I'll make a plug on this right now. This is was a wonderful event to discuss anniversaries, Skylab, IBMP. But several of us who were in the space industry were recruited into academia because there really is a shortage of qualified people to be out there teaching a lot of these topics. And in the case of the U.S. is that we really weren't launching anything from U.S. soil for a while. We didn't have an exploration program for over a decade, but there's a lot of interest out there. So I know in our own department, when they surveyed the entering students, 50% of them wanted to be in human spaceflight, but less than 25% of the faculty are teaching in those areas. And so I actually have an open faculty position, human systems integration and aerospace engineering. We're actively trying to recruit at any faculty level from tenure track to full professor. And I suspect we'll get another one next year. And as part of taking and educating the next generation so we can have another 50-year anniversary at some point, but in particular having what's not in the textbooks, the experience, the the hands-on building, the theory, the problem solving is so important. And so I'm going to use that as my segue to introduce Mike Lembeck, because he's now on the faculty at Illinois, and he's bringing some really valuable experience, I think, to your students.
Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you, Mr. Abbey and Bonnie, for having me here again. As Bonnie mentioned, I teach the senior spacecraft design course at Illinois. It's a 2-semester sequence where we give students an opportunity to feel what it's like to work in industry, developing groups, working together, responding to a request for proposal, and so forth, to lead to a preliminary design review of a satellite. And that's backed up by my lab, the Lassie Lab. We have opportunities that I never had when I was going through school at this time to actually design, build, and fly real spaceflight hardware. Our first piece of equipment was in orbit about 2 years ago called CAPSAT, a quantum experiment that paved the way for a new experiment that we're now developing in Illinois called the Space Entanglement and Quantum Annealing Experiment. And this is done in cooperation with our physics department, aerospace engineering, and it also has a couple of international pieces, working with the University of Waterloo and the University of Singapore. So our students get to have interactions with folks with different cultures, different ideas, different approaches to engineering, which is very valuable to them at that age. That payload, the SEEK payload, will be flying to the space station next year sometime, and has completed all the integration testing in our lab. Last August, we delivered another student-built instrument called Cosmo to the Carruthers Geochronal Observer. It's a NASA mission that is going to fly out to L1 and then look back at Earth to see what's happening to our upper atmosphere and how it interacts with solar weather and so forth, which is so important to climate. So we're really excited by that. The instrument's been integrated on the spacecraft and is operating properly as of today. And our third mission, which is really exciting and also has a big Illinois piece to it, we're working with Fermilab up in Batavia, Illinois, to develop a 6U CubeSat to look for dark matter. It's has a silicon sensor that'll stare right into the heart of our galaxy and look for a particular theoretical particle called a stereoneutrino. And when that neutrino decays, it gives off a 3.5 kiloelectron volt X-ray. And so our satellite will sit and stare looking for this X-ray signal. And if it does, of course, that'd be something really special if we were able to find the source of dark matter. It's really important, too, to bring in the next generation. As Bonnie mentioned, working with 4-H, we built little CubeSat simulators built on Raspberry Pis and with our own flight interface board. We had a camp about 2 months ago where we brought in 7th and 8th graders. And they developed software in Python that emulated a payload that would work on that satellite. So they got first-hand experience, and my grad students worked with them to work through some of the details of that, just to bring along that next generation and get them that pipeline moving. So it's been exciting to do these programs and see our students touching hardware, getting it to space, operating it, and then hopefully the experience that I've had that I've tried to give back to them will prepare them for another career in industry where they can do some really great things. I should mention one last thing, is if it weren't for this conference, my most popular course, which is the Introduction to Human Spaceflight, Jim Voss teaches a similar class at Boulder and provided me with a lot of material. And that has now developed into a very popular course, and I've been talking with Bonnie and Linda and Steve about how we can improve that, and using astronaut faculty and things available from NASA to give our students a really hands-on intro to human spaceflight.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Is Chris Barber with us?
Yeah. Sure.
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, good. I'm sorry.
I'm not with you. I'm without you.
So, Chris, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. I mean, I've got to say that I feel it's a privilege to be invited to this conference, let alone to speak to it. And I know that a lot of people go to places and they look around at other people there and think, I don't want to talk after them. Well, I looked at the entire panel and thought exactly that, really. So you mentioned anniversaries, and it's 30 years since I first met George Abbey, and he's been a great friend and a great help to me and to our organization, and ultimately to a lot of young people since then. Let me see. Our aim is to utilize the human space program. A lot of young people don't actually realize, particularly if they don't come from particularly well-off backgrounds, that if you make the effort, it pays off and it's worthwhile. They don't have the confidence in themselves or the personal ambitions to make those efforts that can change their lives. And from my experience, the human space program can do that. And we endeavor to look at as many ways as possible to bring people like the august members of this panel and the conference in direct contact with them to help change their lives and their attitudes to what they can do and they can achieve. You mentioned a range of programs we did. One of our big programs at the moment is something we call Mission Discovery, in which young people work with an astronaut. We have some other people from NASA, and we have a range of eminent scientists. And the youngsters follow a program, a day that we call NASA Leadership and Team Building, but none of you would probably recognize it as such, but they like it. The environment of space, how do you create scientifically, how do you create technologically, how do you improve your planning, your budgeting, your presentation skills. And at the end of the week, all of the youngsters give us a presentation on their idea of an experiment to be flown in space. We select the best one, and to date, we've flown over 60 young people's experiments on the International Space Station. Currently, we've got a team at Oxford University developed a recent experiment with Mike Foale, which the youngsters had come up with, on using ferrofluids to generate electricity in space. And that's in the process of being published by Oxford University now, which I think is an amazing thing, that young people from ordinary backgrounds can not only get their experiments in space, but get those experiment results published by one of the top universities in the world. When you say, one of the questions asked was, what's the value of international programs? Mission Discovery is a great program. So, for instance, our last program at King's College London had young people from over 35 different countries. One of my ideas about international programs is all cultures and everybody does almost everything differently and have different approaches to whether it's working together with people, whether it's collegiate working, hierarchical working. And the funny thing is that everybody imagines and believes their approach to working is correct and the right way to do it, and other people actually have the wrong way to do it, and it's all very strange and very odd. And I'm sure some of you Americans even have the misguided idea that we Brits do some things wrong, but I know that seems weird to me. So So the notion of working internationally gets people to understand that your way isn't the only way, it's not necessarily the best, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. And that to work successfully in the ever increasing global world that we live in involves changing your ways slightly and going towards meeting other people halfway and finding ways to get them to come to you to meet and understand the ways you work, and to develop a range of techniques to work with people who not only come from different environments but actually have different cultural approaches to things that you do every single day. What else? Challenges. Recovering from COVID. People got out of the way of doing all sorts of things. Some people in fields that were great at working in those fields stopped working in those fields. Connections finished, connections changed, working patterns changed. So actually recovering and getting a range of programs off the ground involves some form of change. In terms of that, the other big challenge working in education is, of course, that in the UK and much of the West, there's pressure on educational budgets and delivering what is seen as essentials, whereas sometimes they think some of the extra things, they call them soft skills for some reason. Essential life skills are described as soft skills. Those things are not a priority in a lot of places. So I believe that is a challenge. And again, has different approaches that are needed. Online is good, but it's very competitive. And I'll finish with the words, I think it's very hard to beat the life-changing effect that people who have been in space, people who have actually helped put people in space, have on individuals of all ages and all backgrounds. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I'd welcome any questions if you could possibly think of any.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate those remarks, and we will have Q&A at the end of all the presentations. Is Fred still with us? Fred Hayes, he was online. Did he drop off? Okay, we'll come back to him. Alex, Mr. Alex Blackwood. What I didn't mention about Alex in his introduction is that I also met Alex now, about 23 years ago or something like that. He was the engine behind starting the Scottish Space School in Glasgow that has transitioned to Strathclyde University, and now, of course, has his own educational outreach business, which, Alex, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, it was in about 4 weeks' time, Bonnie, it will be 24 years when we met in Glasgow. And you were talking to some schools and things like that. And that really started it all with yourself and George. But prior to that, I was the chief executive of an education business partnership, and I was the chair of the International Education Business Partnership, which had lots of countries. When Chris mentioned earlier on about how different countries approach things in different ways, and that's absolutely true. So the Education Business Partnership Network, which I was chair of, just looked at different approaches to how business and education work together, always for the benefit of young people. And there were different examples of it all around the world. However, when I met you, Bonnie, and George, etc., and we had a programme within this network about promoting science, technology, engineering and maths, then we did grasp an opportunity to be able to develop the Scottish Space School in the first instance and promote careers in science, technology, engineering and maths, using space as an attraction for young people to realise how exciting and important the whole STEM area was. And we've done that for a very long time. Things changed, of course. I left Career Scotland and I became the chief executive of the Education Business Partnership Network, and I saw an opportunity to actually extend that approach that we had in Scotland to different countries around the world. And that's what we did. And but COVID hit, as Chris mentioned, COVID hit. The Education Business Partnership Network kind of suffered because of that lack of networking and contact over those 2 to 3 years. But it's still there. And myself and my colleague Val Caldwell established a new company called IPN Scotland. And we manage the IPN network virtually. And we've got contacts in different parts of the world who are tapping into that space program that we developed in Scotland. So we're running events. We have a project or a program with Norway, with California teachers, and with schools in Scotland. It's interesting that one of the major points that I find is important about what has been adopted in these different countries, including South Africa, is our approach in Scotland, which we took with us, and that is about reach. Right? How do we reach as many young people as we possibly can? And what we did in Scotland was we had the program where we took young people to Houston, and then we had the program of bringing astronauts and engineers and scientists over to Scotland, and we spread that word. So not all, although there may have been 600 to 700 young people who went to NASA, there were thousands of young people in Scotland who got that experience. And that reach was a really important thing. I'm pleased to say that the Norwegians are doing it almost exactly the same. They're running a national program about girls into engineering and technology and mathematics. And they run a national program that select a small amount of young students, and we run a program for them at NASA. But when they come back from that program in NASA, these young students go around schools throughout Norway, talking to these, all girls, go around schools talking to other girls about how young girls can get involved in STEM. And so it's a role model approach, and it's a reach approach. So what's the stimulation of STEM through space? Well, firstly, it's the program itself. It's the experience that young people have. It's about NASA scientists, engineers, and astronauts. It's about role models. As I said before, it's about reach. You mentioned earlier on in your email, Bonnie, about museums and science centres. Well, you know that we used the Glasgow Science Centre to promote this whole thing and ran a whole number of events, which you attended and many others attended. And that had a great contribution towards the reach that we were achieving amongst young people. Obviously, you mentioned challenges, and obviously, as I mentioned before, as Chris did, COVID was a challenge for us because our business is about relationships. And when that were prevented from having that face-to-face relationship, that was an issue. There's also an issue with budgets, because budgets are always an issue, all right? But there are opportunities for new approaches to how we can raise budgets and funding to get the involvement. There's also the opportunity that there is, as we all see, I'm sure we all see, that as a new generation of scientists and engineers and astronauts come forward and they're willing to be involved in what we all do, then that new generation just adds a significant amount to the experiences of young people, our young people, and gives them this life-changing opportunity to see things at first hand. So that's what we do, and that's what we're continuing to do. And as I said, if there's any more details that anybody wants about what we do, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Alex. And Alex does bring students and teachers to the Houston area. They conduct tours and visitations. I've had the opportunity to speak to groups such as from Norway and actually from another country called California. I remember that visit too. So that was a lot of fun. So I think we'll go ahead with Dr. Ludmila Barokova, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. My name is Ludmila Barokova. I'm deputy director in Institute of Medical Biological Problems, and also I'm professor of Moscow State University. My English is very far from excellent, and I will speak Russia. Sorry. Наш институт – академический институт, где проводятся многочисленные исследования в области космической биологии и космической медицины. И в нашем институте есть специальные курсы, постдоковские курсы. Каждый год мы набираем 10-15 человек. Кроме этого, мы имеем специальные соглашения с университетами, например, Московским медицинским университетом, Московским государственным университетом, Московским авиационным институтом. И студенты приходят к нам на практику и затем остаются на выполнение дипломной работы. Именно из них мы потом набираем курс постдоков. То есть они на этапе обучения в вузах проходят практические занятия и входят и работают в лаборатории. Что касается работы с школьниками, то здесь несколько вариантов. Например, некоторые школы также сотрудничают с институтом, участвуют в выполнении специальных космических экспериментов. Это действительно очень интересные вещи, потому что видно, как горят глаза ребят, когда они общаются с космонавтами, и когда они ставят контрольные опыты у себя в поле, классов, и могут сравнить с тем, что получается у космонавтов. Кроме этого, в Москве есть специальные медицинские колледжи. И очень часто сотрудников нашего института приглашают читать лекции в этих школах. И тогда часть ребят, которые уже сложно заниматься медициной, могут затем пойти в медицинские вузы, помня о том, что есть такая замечательная специальность, как космическая медицина. Ну, и Моня здесь вот поставила несколько интересных вопросов, в том числе и вопросов, как распространить, ну, вообще школьникам, которые хотят заниматься биологией и медициной, ребятам, пусть они будут в тематике, как рассказать им о том, что такое, как обеспечивается жизнедеятельность космонавтов. Вот такие лекции, популярные лекции, наши сотрудники читают в Доме ученых, в специальном музее космонавтики, который есть в Москве. И затем уже ребятам приходить в институт и смотреть на то, как моделируется медицина, на иммерсионные ванны, на то, как работают с клетками и животными. Институт старается, с одной стороны, рассказать популярно о том, что происходит на космической станции, и, например, как проводятся исследования на биоспутниках. А с другой стороны, мы стараемся готовить новую смену, нашу новую смену, изучая студентов и готовя аспирантов, которые придут нам на смену. В качестве небольшого такого шуточного примера касаемо международных обменов. Два моих аспиранта, успешно защитившие диссертации, прошли через длительные международные обмены, и один аспирант теперь заместитель директора большой фармацевтической фирмы, а аспирантка, которая тоже замечательно выполняла эксперименты на клетках, теперь пишет фантастические романы, которые пользуются популярностью. Вот так повлияли международные обмены на аспирантов. Ну, что касается космических экспериментов, конечно, когда ребята приходят в институт, всем хочется самим поставить космический эксперимент, приходится объяснять, насколько это сложно и сколько нужно хорошо к таким экспериментам готовиться. А с другой стороны, когда идут комплексные эксперименты, видно, как активно студенты принимают в них участие, как они у своих взрослых коллег, которые рядом работают. И приятно видеть, что постепенно из них вырастают хорошие специалисты, которые уже сами сами пишут статьи и сами начинают привести.
See, Bonnie, this is Fred Hayes. I'm back online now. I had one of those Houston, we have a problem.
Well, your timing's perfect. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Burovkova for those good remarks, and thank you for the work you're doing. And so, Fred, the floor is yours. Do you hear me?
Say again, Bonnie?
I said it's all yours.
Okay, all right. Infinity Science Center kind of came about from a tragedy, the 9/11 event, where the required security on all government facilities essentially closed down the very small museum that existed at NASA Stennis Space Center. As a result, it was decided to deed 18 acres to a not-for-profit board that was formed that I joined at the start to raise over $40 million to build the Infinity Science Center, and we finally achieved that for the most part to get underway with an opening in 2005. Being a new museum, we elected to, at least most of our primary exhibits, to go more modern with interactive touchscreens. And we do have artifacts. In fact, as we serve also as the visitor center for Stennis, and so have probably the largest rocket engine collection in the country. But at any rate, we on our board with Jack Blitch, was head of Imagineering for Walt Disney and worldwide. And so he encouraged us to work with Schlossberg, a Disney designer in New York, to get our design done. And as I said, most of these were modern, interactive. The type exhibits we had were deep sea exploration, hurricane formation, ocean waves, vibration table, remote sensing, and of course upstairs the gallery is the Space Gallery, which covers 50 years of NASA. We also have a 2.5-mile eco learning adventure that goes from our parking lot down to the Pearl River that uses electric trams. Now, I would say there's two ways that people learn. I get STEM learning and from visiting museums, aviation, space, or science museum. One is people just come by and sign in and buy a ticket and wander through the museum and work their around through the exhibit area, and if there are no geezer like me with still a flip phone, they may need the help of our docents on the floor to learn to operate the screens, the touch screens. But at any rate, they complete probably several hour walk around. We do have a 3D theater that has learning that shows on space and science. And I would say what they get by the time they leave is what I call stealth learning. It's not programmed or scheduled, but I think they do come away with some sense of and some knowledge of what they've gotten from just their wandering around. Now, we do have planned throughout the year, planned events through our education department. It's also supported by NASA and as needed, and NOAA, and the Naval Research Lab. And we also have on base at Stennis all the research institutes in the major universities in Mississippi, and major contractors, so Lockheed, Aerojet, Rocketdyne, that are resident at Stennis Space Center, and they joined in actually in some of the exhibit early working meetings we had on what potentially we wanted in the exhibits, basic requirements, and contribute as volunteers as needed on some events. The type of events we have in the year are quite a variety. We have regular STEM family days that people sign up for. We have scouting events, girls and boys that cover space and cover eco subjects that help them earn the merit badges on those particular subjects. We have actually what we call a STEM Fest day, and we have home school days. The home school days have covered things like volcanoes, earthquakes, rockets, robotics, and the ISS on those home school days. This is in addition to what goes on throughout the year, school field trips. Buses, yellow buses roll in at the parking lot with children, and they're somewhat limited in their time to get back to school for the buses to get home. But these are done in a couple of ways. Some of the teachers have their own program and guidance where they work up a plan for what they're going to cover that day at the museum. We also can provide a little cards that give them a fun playing task, if you will, to collect information that forces them to make the rounds through the museum and stop and actually search for the information they need to fill in. These happen all through the year, although the peak times are generally in the spring of the year. All of these, I think, not only given the basic knowledge intended for their parents there, but they introduce them to potential STEM career paths and some sense of the skills they need to pursue them. As far as, you mentioned challenges, of course, being a not-for-profit, as most museums are in the U.S., it's always fundraising, and I've supported museums around the country with events and that accord through the years. We also try to keep current with the subject matter, both with NASA, particularly with things we might have in the Space Gallery, but also with contact with other museums, which is kind of like a family, that we freely pass information, and I look at programs they have, particularly for children, to see if there's a new program we can introduce among our suite that we currently have. So we went through a rough time with the COVID period that virtually made us close down for 6 weeks in 2020. But we've come back. We're about 3/4 of the attendance we were before COVID, but are back in full operation and doing well these days. So that's kind of my story. Dennis, and that's some similar story you'd find for the similar type museums around the country.
Well, thank you, Fred. That's an important role for museums, both in informal education, but also in preserving our history. That's where our artifacts go, and fundraising is a big part of that. Having been the president and CEO of a museum of flight, I know how hard that can be, and COVID was a big impact. And depending upon both individual donors and corporate donors and foundations is important in keeping this history alive. So I hope we all invest in that as well. So congratulations for making it through COVID as well. So I'd like to now go to Dr. Steve Robinson. Are you still on, Steve? There you are.
Still here. Hard to get rid of me.
So we have about 15 minutes, and I believe the timing should work if we're brisk enough to get some Q&A at the end. So let's go.
Okay. I'll go quick. Thanks so much, Bonnie and Mr. Abbey, and all my panel members, and also the attendees, both online and in person. It's really great to see so many familiar names and friends. I'm here in California now. I've been at UC Davis for about 12 years. It's hard to believe after so many years at NASA. I'm in the mechanical and aerospace engineering department. As a professor, I teach aerodynamics, advanced fluid physics, senior design, various types of spacecraft design, and space mission design courses. But most of my time is spent with something that's fairly new here at UC Davis, about 3 years old, the Center for Spaceflight Research. I currently have 4 professors in this, and my particular lab is the Human Robotics Vehicle Integration and Performance Lab, but there are four different labs. There's a lot of students in these labs trying to get a taste of research and with an interest in humans in space. And it's a wonderful motivator, like we all know. It's how we got into it too. And so this is passing the flame forward, I think. And it's amazing to see what today's students can do. There are about, in my lab alone, there's 44 students. Almost half of them are graduate students, so it's quite the crowd. Lots of different programs going on within this lab. One is an outreach program we call SOAR, S-O-A-R, the STEM Outreach for Academic Reinforcement, where college students go to visit fifth graders in underrepresented communities around Northern California, which there are many, to not so much sell aerospace, but to talk about, if you have a dream, you can make it come true through education. And maybe it's aerospace, but maybe it's STEM, or maybe it's completely not. But these students, the college students, serve as wonderful role models for the younger students, and especially, I think, for the fifth grade girls, to see these very successful college students following their dream, kind of living their dream through education. Here at UC Davis, we have a lot of students who are kind of like me, whose parents did not go to college. I think a lot of you are probably in that boat too. And so it's, you know well that when a student whose parents didn't go to college, when one of those students does graduate, it changes the whole family's perspective on education. And so that's one thing we really try to come out to. We, here at Davis, we have a number of different programs going on. We're the leader of a large NASA Space Technology Research Institute for semi-autonomous space habitats called HOME, Habitats Optimized for Mission Exploration. We are leading this consortium of researchers, about 75 people, across 7 different universities around the U.S. We do have a satellite development program. Our focus is on inspection satellites. So for high-value spacecraft would actually deploy a satellite that would inspect itself. I think after the experience of Columbia and being on the return to flight mission, I'm very passionate about the value of inspecting spacecraft in space. And so that's kind of our major program in satellite technology. Buddy asked us to talk about challenges too, and here's a challenge that I really see in education, and that is spaceflight is evolving quickly, and it should. You know, almost by definition, spaceflight capabilities and research and what we're learning should change quickly and evolve quickly. Education does not. And I don't know if my other panel members have thoughts about this, but I see that as we try to keep up with the students' needs to match the industry's needs when they're graduated and join the industry, this rapidly evolving spaceflight industry that we have, so fortunate to have, education is not keeping up. It's very difficult to make things, new things happen. And I would love to hear from my fellow panel members who may or may not be having this experience too, and some ideas about how to counter that. So that's all I'll say. Thanks so much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Steve, for everything that you're doing as well. And I know he leads a number of research efforts. You'll be on a panel this afternoon after lunch as well. In fact, you're leading it. So really appreciate you being on that leading edge. I'd like to introduce Dan Barstow now, who's joined the Association of Space Explorers. And if you'll define what Space Explorers is so I don't have to, and talk about the programs you're involved in now.
Thank you. Is it okay if I share screen? Yep. Let's see if we can get that. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so the Association of Space Explorers is the membership organization of flown astronauts. I'm not an astronaut. It's incorrectly listed there in the description. I was the senior education manager for the International Space Station. Oh, wait, this is jumping ahead here, sorry. The senior education manager for the International Space Station. I also have worked with the Association of Space Explorers now as a volunteer education mission specialist. The big challenge we have is how to reach a much larger audience. So we have two projects I'd like to describe. One is called Celebrating Diversity from Space. It's funded through the ISS National Lab. The idea is to explore diversity from three perspectives. One is diverse crew. Gender, ethnicity, scientific expertise, engineering, all kinds of diversity. You know, without that diversity, you're unable to achieve success in space. The next is diversity of Earth. That Earth is a wonderful planet with so many different parts. You need all those parts to interconnect in order for the success of the planet. And the third is the diverse communities of the kids that we work with in a variety of after-school programs and other things. Through this project, there are 10 sites, each of which has students who will create 30-minute movies that highlight those three aspects of diversity. I'll give you three examples. One is Leland Melvin, astronaut, working with the Jubilee Family Center in Lynchburg, where he works. The focus they're emphasizing is on access to resources, water and other things that is a challenge on the space station as well as on Earth. A second example is Dr. Cyan Proctor, who flew on the SpaceX Dragon, the orbital mission. She works with the Arizona Civil Air Patrol, who are creating, studying how Earth is seen from, how it differs when you're flying in an airplane and when you're flying in the on the space station or in a spacecraft like the Dragon. The third is Katie Coleman, who's, of course, flown in space, and many of you know she's also a very talented musician. So she's working with some girls and boys clubs to help them explore flutes from around the world and how the environment that the kids have grown up in affect the music they enjoy. So this emphasizes the diverse crew, diverse Earth, and diverse community. The second project I want to talk about is called Earth Movie Theater, where we've taken kind of an interesting approach. Instead of scientific explanations about what you see from space, we've created movies that use music along with these glorious views of Earth. Examples are this sort of spacey music that Catherine Brissett does while we are watching Aurora. Another example is we worked globally during COVID. People around the world performed as part of the Dona Nobis Pacem, singing this glorious piece, playing other instruments, and we sort of connect the world that way. Another example is using humpback whales and their music to help us connect with that kind of environment. And finally, the astronauts themselves, and maybe Steve, since you play an electric guitar, you might want to join in, but Leland Melvin, again, who is a very talented musician, has set up a studio in his attic where he's got displays that look like Earth, and he composes music that helps him feel sort of and express that. So these two examples show how we reach a different kind of audience, much better diversity, and also through using music as a creative venue. If you want to see any of those, you can go to earthmovietheater.org, and I'll wrap it up with that.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I will add that ASC, for those of you don't know, is made up of all flown astronauts from 32 nations. Qualification is one orbit around the Earth. Okay, I'd like to wrap it up then with Jakarta Varnado, and if you could leave us a few minutes for questions. And you're easy to find at NASA, right? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, I'm Dr. Jakarta Varnado. I'm the manager of the High School Aerospace Scholars Program run out of NASA's Johnson Space Center. I'm going to tell you more about the program than myself because we have limited time. The program is actually in its 25th year, and we made a lot of changes this year. So originally the program was a 16-week online course, and then after the 16 weeks, those highest performing students were invited on site a week at a time to come and experience NASA and to do a preliminary design review with NASA scientists and engineers. Because of COVID, we had to shift and redesign the program. So when COVID happened in 2020, we took that in-person part and created a virtual experience. So we call it Moonshot, and they spend a week still working with NASA scientists and engineers going through a preliminary design review. And after that week, then we invite the highest performing teams on site to actually tour the facilities and meet those employees in person. So the 16-week course is focused on all parts of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but it was very research-based. They would read articles, they would write papers, they would work calculations. I became the manager of High School Aerospace Scholars this year in March, and we made a lot of changes. It is now 20 weeks online because in between the modules, we have decided that we are going to give them an opportunity to collaborate and to meet each other in person. So this morning, I was at our very first engineering design challenge in Fort Bend area where we invited our participants to come in person, work together, and solve an engineering design challenge. We will have more of those leading up into our last one, which will focus on the solar eclipse that is happening across Texas. The reason we are focusing on the solar eclipse is because originally HAAS was only available to Texas high school juniors. This year we've included a senior course which teaches them leadership skills where they are mentoring the juniors now. All of the seniors were previous participants in HAAS, so they get to talk to other leaders within NASA. They hear about other careers that are in NASA, and this year we are also doing boots on the ground recruitment. So we will be all over Texas. We have partnered with Texas A&M University. We are going to their satellite campuses. We are going to their 2-year partner campuses. We are partnering with independent school districts such as Houston ISD here in the Houston area and Northeast ISD in the San Antonio area.
Very good description, and I will credit Mr. George Abbey, Greg Hayes, and John Young in 1999 for going to the Texas legislature and helping to get this program started. It spun off some other state programs, including Washington State Aerospace Scholars. So can we take 2 questions and then
Mr. Abbey's arranged a very nice lunch for us here in a few minutes, but I think we have time for 2 questions.
Thanks. So, Steve, one of your challenge actually sparked an idea for a comment or a question about gamification. The challenges that we have in learning, and they're not changing that much. I wondered if anybody on the panel wanted to comment on some of the trends towards gamification. I like the way, Fred, you put it. Sometimes, we have to come up with these other ways to create stealth learning opportunities. Just wondered if anybody would like to comment on that trend.
Yeah.
Well, I know growing up, before we had TV, we had games. Maybe not electronic games, but we do, I think, need to find tools to help young people creatively think and problem solve outside the classroom. And so gamification. Linda, you have a thought on that?
I think anything is fair that draws people in, and not everybody learns the same. And there's study after study. I grew up, and in my education, it was mostly going in classrooms and sitting in a lecture. And I did eventually, I did learn from that because I was successful and did all that. But study shows that's not the best way to do it, and students don't stay engaged. So whatever works. And I have no personal experience to comment on using that technique, but
I think it's worth maybe bringing up at next year's discussion.
I will say that the Moonshot, the virtual experience that we offer, is a gamified version of the PDR. So they complete challenges as they go along throughout that week.
You should probably add AI next year too.
Yeah,
another
right.
game changer.
Should we do another one? Okay.
Can I just add on to that the Challenger Learning Center has for many years, well now, going on 30 years, had a game-like environment in which young people go into a Challenger Center, and one group is mission control, another group is the participate in a space mission. It's incredibly powerful, reaches hundreds of thousands of kids every year. It's a really sort of participatory experience, and I think it's a great example of gamification.
Yeah, so a lot of the nonprofits have summer camps, and I'll give a small plug for Lone Star Flight Museum because I'm on the board, and we brought in the Space Shuttle's motion-based simulator restored, which was kind of a wedge into space. We've got the rover there, but they also have summer camps. In summer camps, there's a lot of competition, if you want to call that gamification, and they enjoy learning in that environment. So Space Center Houston as well.
One thing I'd mention also is that if it's like in the past, all of these panels will be archived on the website at the Baker Institute for Public Policy, both in English and Russian. And so educators, students, anyone you think might be interested in these panels, and some of the panels are just wonderful. Make sure you refer them to the website and they can see these panels.
And if you need contact information through either Mr. Abbey or Richard or myself, we can get that to you. These programs survive on enthusiasm and a lot of times just volunteer muscle from people like you to make it work. So, thank you everybody on the panel. Delighted with your participation. And for those of you that are virtual, you don't get lunch, so sorry. Be here next year. The rest of us will adjourn for lunch. Thank you.
Bye-bye.